The Wooden Award has never been won by a freshman 2 years in a row. Could that streak come to an end in 2026?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, joined by the great Leif Thulin on today's show. We want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and remind you that you can check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music. Well, the Wooden Award odds at FanDuel came out earlier this week, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to take a look at the top five players with the best odds, three of them being freshmen. Does that mean we might have a freshman for a second year in a row after Cooper Flagg won this award last year? We'll talk about some other candidates, maybe some dark horse players who could be in this conversation. And then we're going to close out the show taking a look at Creighton's non-conference schedule. Greg McDermott and the Bluejays released that earlier this week. We'll take a look at some unique wrinkles to their schedule, something we haven't seen too often, and make some projections for how they'll do this year. Belief, we want to start the show. The five players with the best odds to win the Wooden Award this upcoming season. Again, all of this per our friends at FanDuel. Number one, I don't think this is a surprise. This is who I would have projected. It's Braden Smith for Purdue at plus 440. And then it's a trio of freshmen. Darryn Peterson at Kansas at plus 850. AJ Dibansa from BYU at plus 1,000. And then Cameron Boozer from Duke at plus 1,100. And then you follow that up with Texas Tech big man JT Toppin at plus 1,200. So, Leif, I guess first question is just, if you were kind of thinking ahead of time, thinking of who the five players with the best odds would be, is this more or less what you think that list would look like? Do you think there's any like glaring misses of players who should be in this kind of early part of this conversation?
Yeah, I think those guys were the headliners for me. I think there's a very good chance that a freshman repeats, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more likely that Peterson or Boozer win than Braden Smith, because I think Braden Smith is going to be excellent. He's probably going to be the Big Ten Player of the Year again and facilitate and score. But I just think the numbers, the sheer numeric output that Peterson could have as the ball is in his hands a ton, or Boozer, because Duke likely is going to be a top 10 team for all of the season, and he's going to be the best player, in my opinion. I think that lends itself more conducively to winning National Player of the Year than scoring 13, 14, and 8. Even if it is the most impactful player, I just think that the sheer numerical output is going to be greater by those two. So I think there's a very good chance those would be my number one and number two on my board of who is the most likely to win it all.
Yeah, I think the Smith argument is interesting because I hear exactly what you're saying. If Purdue runs the table and is the number one team throughout the season, I think that the narrative is going to be really strong around Braden Smith. But also, we're going to get to it in a second, one of the other top 10, best odds on here is Trey Kaufman-Renn, one of his teammates, which should not be held against Braden Smith necessarily, but is certainly a factor when evaluating kind of his worthiness for an award like this. But Purdue, I think they have an opportunity to be just like the overwhelming best team in college basketball this year. And if that happens, I'm not saying it will, but if it happens, I think that narrative will be tough for Smith or tough for anybody else to kind of break through. But I absolutely hear the argument on Boozer in particular. I'm not sure if he's the best of these three freshmen necessarily. I think they're all a little bit, they're different in their own ways, but they all have a lot of things going for them. But Boozer's likely going to be the player with the ball in his hands a ton for a Duke team that, if they're back in the top 10 after losing, their entire starting five to the NBA draft, that's going to be a tough narrative to curb too. So whereas with Peterson, he may be the best of this group, but I'm not all that sold on Kansas. Sure, they get Flory Badunga back and they get some transfers that I like, but I'm not feeling great about the Jayhawks. And if they have a third straight bad season by their standards, I think there's almost no way that they have the Wooden Award winner. I cannot see it happening unless Kansas really kind of is back to being, at that blue blood status. And then Dibansa is just a very interesting one too, because BYU has a ton of talent around him. They got him a point guard in Rob Wright. Richie Saunders is there. Their bigs are back. And I think this is a team that's going to be very good. But is Dibansa going to put up the kind of numbers necessary to be a Wooden Award winner? I kind of don't think so. I don't think he's going to be bad. I just think there's enough talent around him on that roster that he's not going to put up like huge, gaudy, jaw-dropping numbers necessarily. So it's an interesting group. I sort of still lean Smith because of the narrative, but I kind of like Boozer as a solid pick here too, because I think again, first of all, the last couple freshmen to win the Wooden Award were Cooper Flagg last year and then Zion Williamson in 2019. So Duke has the theme here. So it wouldn't be surprising if another freshman wins it, if it does happen to come from John Shire's program.
Yeah, I think Boozer would be my number one pick. I do think Peterson is the best collegiate player, but I think Boozer, the fact that I think Duke has a roster that has been proven by the way that Shire built the previous roster around a star, and they found a way to manipulate and perfectly handpick the talent around their star player. And this year he is that star player. I think that last year's roster was better. I think Cooper Flagg is better than Cam Boozer, but that means, everyone else is cleared out too. So I think that all the rosters reset. He's got the best spot to have the best team and be the best player on his team. Whereas I think Darryn Peterson is going to put up gaudy numbers. I wouldn't be surprised if Darryn Peterson puts up like 23-7 and he wins the award. Like, I think Darryn Peterson's that special. I think he's the best player in the country actually already. But I just think you got to win a little bit. And like you said, there is some reluctance about Kansas. That said, Bill Self has won 18 since the year 2000. He's won 18 conference titles. At one point, he had a share of 17 straight. I just don't see him struggling much longer. Maybe he doesn't win often. There's better competition. Houston's proven what they can do. Iowa State's good. Texas Tech's good. All this stuff. But that's Kansas we're talking about. Now you could win the National Player of the Year. Like, this is the best player that Kansas has had since Frank Mason. Like, he might even be better than Frank Mason, who won the National Player of the Year. And so I'm bullish on Kansas, not in the sense of them being great, but just people seem to be doubting Bill Self for the first time ever. Whereas the last couple of years, it's been like, oh, it's Bill Self, they're going to be fine. But you could see that the roster construction didn't work. I think Bill Self's overhauled it, and he's got his dude and his best dudes. And the recent ones have had guys that had accolades, but weren't like the most dominant player on the floor type of thing. Darryn Peterson is that, and he's going to come in and command respect and attention from day one. I don't think Kansas had a guard do that since Devon Dotson, probably. I mean, I know they won the national title, but that wasn't guard play. That was their wings of Agbaji Brown. Like, I think Devon Dotson's the closest, but even then, I don't think he was close to what Frank Mason was for Kansas.
Well, those are the top five guys that we talked about. I'll lay them out again briefly for y'all. Braden Smith, Darryn Peterson, AJ Dybansa, Cameron Boozer, and JT Toppin. 6 through 10 on the Wooden Award list from FanDuel. Yaxel Lendeberg is next at plus 1,600, the transfer to Michigan. Bennett Sturtz going to Iowa, plus 2,100. Darion Williams transferring to NC State at plus 2,700. Donovan Dent transferring to UCLA at plus 2,700, and then Trey Kaufman-Renn also at plus 2,700. And Leif, I mentioned the transferring because 4 of these 5 players are transfers, and with you throwing in JT Toppin and the 3 freshmen, literally 8 of the 10 players on this list are either incoming freshmen or players who transferred to a new school. The only players who have stayed at their original school for longer than 1 year on this list are both for the Purdue Boilermakers, Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn. So I'm not sure I have a point there other than to note that's a lot of players transferring on this list. And certainly I think a lot of optimism around how these players will kind of successfully or seamlessly transition to their new programs. I think it's also noteworthy that 3 of these players are transferring into the Big Ten, and Lendeberg, Sturtz, and Dent, with, of course, Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn. Also in the Big Ten, a lot of concentrated talent at the top of that conference. I guess, Leif, looking at the transfers on this list, we'll kind of ignore Kaufman-Renn here. Which of these 4 guys, Lendeberg, Sturtz, Darion Williams, or Dent, do you expect to make the biggest impact on their new program this upcoming season?
That's a tricky one because they all assume, big roles as their top 10 in the Wooden, but the role definition, like the one I think is going to have the biggest control on how his program does is Bennett Sturtz. But the one I think has the highest chance of really elevating his team to national title contention. And, and if you're in that category, then you really have a chance to make an All-American would be Lendeborg, because I think they've got the baseline of talent that makes it possible to be perpetuated from, here's a guy who scores 17 and 8, and that's a really good player, to All-American 17 and 8, because the rest of his team's good and they're winning and he's the best player. He's the forefront of their success. So I think he's going to be a better version of what Danny Wolf was for Michigan last year. And I think Michigan's got a better team this year than last year, which is the Sweet 16 team. So I would go Lendenborg to answer the question, but I think the one who has got the most control of his program is going to be Bennett Sturtz at Iowa.
Yep, and I would throw in here too. I really love Donovan Dent, but I don't know that the numbers are going to be there at UCLA just because of the style that they play. I think he's going to be very good, but I was a little surprised to see him this high on the list, even though I think he's a great player, only because I just don't see it happening for him statistically. And there's some other guards that I actually like a little bit better. And that's actually what I want to transition to talk about now, because FanDuel didn't just release 10 players. This list has, I think, like 50 or so different guys that they have odds for. We're not going to talk about all of them, but we are going to look at some other players, maybe some dark horse candidates to be in contention, or maybe some guys that we think it might be worth tossing some money down to see if they can make a push and be a surprise Wooden Award winner. We're going to talk about those players coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, summer sports are in full swing. So whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf out on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are still getting sunburned out on the beach. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. So whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right out into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're part of the action. Already talked about some Wooden Award odds. We got a lot more coming your way here in the second segment. And folks, if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Leif, we're still talking Wooden Award odds here as they were released by FanDuel earlier this week. We talked about the players with the best odds, the top 10 candidates according to FanDuel, and kind of which players in that group we liked, maybe some that we weren't so optimistic about. And now we kind of want to take a look at some of the other guys. So I ended up pulling a list of everybody whose odds were 6,500 plus 6,500 or better. It ended up being 31 players, so there's a lot. There's also, I mean, folks, if you really want to toss some money away, I saw Bryce James, Ronnie James' younger brother, they got odds on him, even though I don't even know if he's going to be a rotation player at Arizona. But if you like 24,000 to 1, you can toss some money there. Keon Anthony, Carmelo Anthony's son, had some odds there too. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them, but some other players that kind of stood out to me, Leif, that weren't in that top 10, but still have decent odds to take home the Wooden Award. Otega Owe from Kentucky at plus 3,300. He's the only other player above plus 4,000. You have another freshman, Nate Ament from Tennessee at plus 4,000. Tahad Pettiford at plus 4,000. And then a couple at plus 4,800. That's Graham Ike from Gonzaga, Rob Wright from BYU, Boogie Fland from Florida, and Josh Hubbard from Mississippi State. Out of that group, Leif, is there anybody that you think like, yeah, I would really be willing to maybe toss $5 or $10 down there, because I think that their odds of climbing into that conversation and potentially taking home that award are pretty good?
So I've got a guy that I just can't wait to talk about. So I might be jumping the gun a touch here, but when you sent me the topic, I was like, I got a dark horse. I can't wait. And I didn't really look at the notes. Because, you form your own opinions on who you think's great without looking at the odds. And then you look at the odds and you say, oh, that's a good value. So I looked at them after I'd already thought of who I'm going to talk about. And it's Christian Anderson. It's Christian Anderson. Like, the dude is unbelievable. I talked about him just on a whim last year. I saw him play his highlights and someone was like, oh, Texas Tech, the 7th best team, 8th best team in the Big. And I was like, man, that's a really good team. If that's the case, that's the best conference ever. It turned out that the SEC was maybe the best conference ever, and this team made the Elite Eight still. And I tweeted before the year, this is a Sweet 16, Elite 18, and probably a top 4 finisher in the Big 12. So I think I did well there. I underestimated Christian Anderson. That was part of my logic. It was like, they've got this guy who's a dude coming off the bench. And like, if you have a dude coming off the bench, then great. I think there's a very real chance he has a better season than JT Toppin. And JT Toppin was top 5. So I bit my tongue when we were talking about Toppin because that was going to be my point. I know that's not exactly what you asked here, but I just couldn't wait any longer. I wanted to get first dibs on the Christian Anderson hype train. I feel like I've been one of the conductors of it since last season on Locked On College Basketball game nights. When he had a really good game against Houston when they beat Houston, and I talked about him ad nauseum. So I just wanted to tell everyone, get your Christian Anderson tickets. You may not win National Player of the Year, but I think there's a real chance that if you have a cash out option type of thing, that he's going to really push for it. And you're going to see a guy that scores 20 a game be a Big 12 Player of the Year candidate.
Yeah, it's funny. Anderson, I wonder what his odds would have been had these come out before the FIBA U19 event, because he was incredible in that. And obviously he was very good last year at Texas Tech. And as you said, you gave him his flowers at the time, and he was a pretty trendy candidate to be kind of a breakout. And breakout's such a unique term. I would consider anybody who averaged double figures, they can't really break out more from there, but Anderson's going to be much better than he was last year. And he was already really good last year. And then you saw him in that FIBA tournament just look outstanding. So yeah, I think this is a great pick. For what it's worth, he's at plus 5,000. He's right around where, Rob Wright and Fland and Hubbard are plus 4,800. PJ Haggerty, Milos Uzan are also plus 5,000. Same with Andrei Stojakovic and Richie Saunders. So out of that group, like players kind of right around him, I absolutely love Anderson in this group. I think some might quibble with Haggerty being so low because he was an All-American last year, but I think he'd have to put up significantly, or at least as good, if not better numbers to even be in that conversation again. And I just have a hard time seeing that. Uzan, I'm not sure the numbers are going to be there, even though he's probably the best player, the most experienced player on a very good Houston team. But Anderson has the combination of really good team, really tough competition, potential to be like a big name face breakout type player around the college basketball space. I think, again, Toppin almost maybe hurts his odds, but if he outplays Toppin, which I am with you, I don't think that's crazy to think at all, then yeah, that could vault him very much into this conversation. Wooden Award is always tough because, you're betting on a player to be the literal best player in college basketball, which is difficult. But if you could find odds on him for like all Big 12 or Big 12 Player of the Year, like that, absolutely worth taking a look at, because I think he's absolutely fantastic, and I think he's a really good shout here for kind of a dark horse candidate for this award.
And so I have a follow up, and this is unprompted, but so of the list you gave before the Christian Anderson, when I jumped the gun, so apologies for that, but I had the Christian Anderson ready to go. Is there anyone, even in the top 10, like that 5 through 10, or that second group you gave, that's probably the 10 through 15, 10 through 17 area, that you feel confident is ahead of Christian Anderson? Because to me, if I were to rank it out, I'd probably go Boozer, Peterson, Smith, AJ, and then I start to get to it like, hey, I'm going to take guys that are boom or bust a little bit. And it's like the Christian Anderson, JT Toppin, and maybe I'm throwing TKR, but I just don't think TKR has a great chance because Braden Smith's better. So like that rules him out. So then you get to the Landenberg, and then I basically go Christian Anderson's like right in that mix. And so you get to the Nate Ament, you get to some of those other guys you listed, and they have some potential. But like I think Christian Anderson is better than Rob Wright anyway, and is going to have the ball in his hands more frequently. And so the Rob Wright, Nate Ament, those type of guys, I don't think have as good of chances to be the conductor to their team's success as Christian Anderson. Am I crazy for that?
No, you're not crazy. And it's funny. I like the way you phrased it, because the idea of like, who would I have confidently ahead of Christian Anderson? There's not a ton. Like, I think you're right. I think Landenberg is somebody that I would have confidently ahead of Christian Anderson outside of the top 5. But again, he's 6th. So he's right in that conversation. But even like Sturtz, if I was not very good, I still think he's great, but I'm not sure he's, again, confidently ahead of Anderson. I'm a little down on Dent. I hear your point on TKR. Darion Williams, maybe, but like I'm not super sold on NC State yet. I think they'll be good eventually, but I want to see how the pieces come together. Outside of that, honestly, one of the only other names that is ahead of Anderson that I probably would still have ahead of him is Josh Hubbard. And I'm still not super sold, only because Mississippi State may not be all that good next year, and the SEC is going to be really tough. But I mean, Hubbard averaged 19 in the SEC last year, one of the best conferences, historically ever. He didn't do a lot else. He's not a great facilitator, but he didn't turn the ball over all that much, and he was pretty efficient on 19 per game. Like, I probably have Hubbard a little higher, but again, for Hubbard to win the Wooden Award, Mississippi State's probably got to be a top 10, maybe top 15 team, maybe. But like, whereas with Christian Anderson, Texas Tech's probably going to be a top 10 team. So that makes, again, the confidence is kind of there. So Hubbard's one of the only other ones that I'm like, yes, absolutely. I think I would have him over Anderson, but even still, Ament, Owe, Pettiford, Ike, Wright, like, not necessarily. I'm kind of with you on Anderson being a guy that maybe, again, I suspect 2 weeks ago, if these had come out, he'd be at like plus 10,000 or maybe even plus 15,000. And now he's at plus 5,000 because of that FIBA event. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if those odds keep going up for him because how he looked this summer and how he might project to look for Texas Tech this year.
Well, and the other person, real quickly, is Mikel Brown. That like people would have thought, oh, he's a good player, like coming out, he's a 5-star, but no one really thought of him as a potential top 5 pick. Like it was a foregone conclusion. You had some variation of Peterson, Boozer, AJ, and then you go Nate Ament, Koa Pete was kind of like the consensus. Well, now he's really thrust himself into that conversation. Many believe that he was the best player there. And so he'd be the other guy I'd consider at plus 6,500, right? Like that's the other guy with the talent to do it. I think there's a certain level of sheer productivity you need. And sometimes the older guys who have that level of productivity don't have the flash. But I think there's just a talent level that you have to put yourself on a trajectory to have a chance at this award. And he's one of the few that I look at that possesses it. Even guys like Darren Williams, who I've loved since he was at Nevada. I don't think he's got the ability to be the best player in the ACC, and that's what you need to be. And so I think there's just a level of like, if Cam Boozer struggles or gets hurt, maybe Mikel Brown can be the best player because he's the most dynamic in the ACC. And I think that's the stuff I look for when trying to pick out the dark horses. And, you know, I've never actually done futures for players. I've done futures for champions. And typically I look at that same thing as like, do they have a depth of talent that not everyone knows about? And I just know something more. And I think that Christian Anderson would have been that before FIBA, like you said.
Yeah. I like the Mikel Brown pick a lot. I think that roster construction is really advantageous for him. He's basically surrounded by a bunch of like knockdown 3-point shooters. I think he's going to be able to get crafty and creative. We saw what Pat Kelsey was able to do with Chucky Hepburn last year. Obviously an older guy, but Mikel Brown's got some real juice to him. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him be a player who could potentially put himself into this conversation again if Louisville can be in that conversation as one of, if not the best team in the ACC. A few players that I want to mention here quickly before we move on, talk about Creighton's non-con that weren't in the top 30 or weren't plus 6,500 or better odds that kind of intrigue me. Tucker DeVries, health being a factor for him, obviously, but he's going to get the ball a lot for a good team in the Big Ten in Indiana. Jaden Quaintance at Kentucky. I'm not sure the offense is there for him, but defensively, he's outstanding, and that puts him in an interesting spot. John Blackwell for Wisconsin, I think is going to be in this conversation a little bit more than maybe they have him here just because there's no John Tonji anymore for the Badgers, and I think they're going to be pretty good. And then a guy who I don't even think had odds at all is Wesley Yates. Wesley Yates in the second half last year at USC averaged 18 on like 49% shooting from three. He's now at UW. I don't know. I think, and he's reunited with Desmond Claude, his teammate from USC. I could see Wesley Yates popping and being a guy who maybe not full on player of the year. Like that's tough, but I wouldn't be surprised if his odds are a heck of a lot higher by midseason than they are right now. Let's put it that way. All right, Leif, want to move on? Oh, go ahead.
I said you're a Big Ten guy.
I know, apparently so. I'm not typically, but there's a lot of talent in the Big Ten this year. So we'll see how that shakes out. I was just thinking as I said that with Wesley Yates, I was like, man, I don't even know if I could pick him as one of the top 10 players in the Big Ten, but he's probably top 10, but top 5, probably not. There's just a lot of talent in that conference. Leif, want to move on and talk Creighton. Non-conference schedule came out a few days ago. Features a fun early season road test and a trip to Vegas for the Players Era Festival. We're going to talk about that, what it means for Greg McDermott's club, coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, closing out the show, moving away from our Wooden Award conversation to instead look at the non-conference schedule for Greg McDermott and the Creighton Bluejays. Came out earlier this week. We've seen quite a few of the Big East schedules coming out. Xavier's came out not that long ago. Georgetown's is out. I think Butler's is out as well. So UConn is getting close to being done. So we're starting to see how this conference is shaking out for this upcoming season. Some really fun stuff here. If you're looking on YouTube, you can see the schedule posted on our screen. I'm going to just kind of rapid fire read the games here, and then we'll kind of get some initial reactions and thoughts to this schedule. 2 exhibition games for Creighton, both at home. Iowa State on October 17th, and then Colorado State on October 25th. And then they're at home against South Dakota on the 6th of November to start the season. Then they go out to Spokane to take on the Gonzaga Bulldogs on November 11th. Then they're home again against Maryland Eastern Shore on the 14th, North Dakota on the 19th, Then they get into the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas. They open up that event on November 24th against Baylor. Then they play Iowa State the next day. So they will play Iowa State in an exhibition game. And then again in the second game of the Players Era Festival. You do not see that very often. That's kind of an interesting wrinkle here. Then their third game in the Players Era Festival will be to be determined based on how they do in those first games. Close out the non-conference with a home game against Nicholls State on the 2nd of December, road game against Nebraska on the 7th, home game against Kansas State on the 13th, and then a home game against Utah Tech on the 22nd to close out the non-con. Leif, initial thoughts, initial reactions to Creighton's non-conference schedule for this upcoming season?
I think it's a solid one. I think, you look at some of the best schedules in the country, like Florida, UConn, some of those teams, and they're playing each other, obviously, but they play 5 or 6 non-conference high majors plus an MTE, and that leads to 8 or 9 really good games, and that's fantastic. Whereas a lot of these teams haven't played many of them, so we say it critically of them. At least Creighton, who is not a blue blood, but they're certainly a very good preeminent power in college basketball. They have matchups against big time schools, Gonzaga, Baylor, and then you look at the MT and you expect that you're going to get good competition in that. And obviously you don't know all of it, but you know who's in them in that event. So I am pleased with what Creighton put together, and I think it's good because at a certain extent you got to build it on how your team is and not what it was, because they had a staple, an institution as their defensive mold, and that was Ryan Kalkbrenner. So this team needs to grow. Like, you need to have the ability to let your team grow with non-conference schedule, as opposed to a team that returns everything playing a daunting schedule. So I think they balanced it pretty well. I expect them to lose to the likes of Gonzaga, especially because it's in Spokane. But I think Baylor, they have a chance, but I would lean towards Baylor, just raw athleticism, because Creighton doesn't have their institution, which was Ryan Kalkbrenner. Like, that is such a that might be the biggest loss in all of college basketball, more than Janai Broom, more than Cooper Flagg. And that sounds crazy because those guys were the front runners for National Player of the Year. But Kalkbrenner was the most important player to his team in all of college basketball last year. And I'm very curious to see what Creighton's identity becomes. And so I have tempered expectations, but I think they balanced the novelty of their team well with who they play.
Yeah, I really like the schedule as well. And I think you're spot on about, they got some early season games to kind of find themselves. They got the exhibition games. They got the South Dakota game, Maryland Eastern Shore, North Dakota. Those are games that, you could kind of mix and match and maybe figure out where do our new players fit in, because they have a lot of new players on this roster and some very talented guys, some veteran guys at the D1 level, but still new players to this roster. But then you also have like early season tests. Obviously, again, both the exhibition games are against quality teams, and then a road game against Gonzaga is incredibly difficult, and so that'll be a challenge for them. And then you get into the Players Era Festival, where you'll get Baylor and Iowa State, and then your third game is probably, unless you go 0-2, your third game is going to be against somebody really good there as well. And then Nebraska and Kansas State. It's not like the flashiest necessarily, but obviously that Nebraska game's a staple for Creighton to be able to play that one. And then Kansas State, I think, is going to be a good team, and I like that one being a little later in the non-conference, because I think both those teams will be better by late December than they are in early November. So that'll be kind of a good sort of final test for Creighton before they get into Big East play. But yeah, I really like this specific schedule for them. I projected them to go 8-3 in the non-conference. I think they lose at Gonzaga. That's an early season game against a Gonzaga team that's got, they lost most of their backcourt, but they still bring back both Graham Ike and Braden Huff in the front court. I think they're going to be a tough team right away. And I think for Creighton, a road trip that early is going to be tough. It's going to be good for them long term, but I don't think they win that one. And then I think they probably drop 2 out of 3 in the Players Era Festival. Not exactly sure who. Baylor's roster is completely brand new, but it's very, very athletic, like you said. Iowa State, Creighton's going to be in a unique position because they will have played them in the exhibition. I suspect both these teams will kind of play their cards pretty close to the chest, knowing that they're playing each other later in the season, and that they're playing each other later in the season with $1 million on the line, potentially in the NIL festival. So they're not going to want to give away too much in that exhibition game. But I think ultimately Creighton comes out of this thing 8-3. If they do that, they pick up at least one nice win in Vegas. They beat Nebraska on the road. They beat Kansas State. If they do that, I think they're going to be in a pretty good spot coming into conference play. But Leif, as you said, really new look roster. I mean, Kalkbrenner, I'm with you. If not the biggest loss in college basketball, certainly one of the top 2 or 3, just for how long he was there, how impactful he was on the defensive end of the floor. I mean, how much of a load he was on both ends, really. But this team also loses Stephen Ashworth. They also lose Pop Isaacs, who granted only played a few games for them, but was still a very talented player. They lose Jameer Neal. This is going to be a really new look team. I like some of the additions. Owen Freeman and Josh Dix from Iowa, I think, are both going to be good, but Freeman's dealing with some injury stuff, so we'll see what that ends up being for him. Hudson Greer, 4-star small forward coming in. I think he'll be solid. Blake Harper from Howard's a player I like, but the pieces got to all fit together. And there are not a ton of coaches in college basketball I trust more than Greg McDermott to figure out how to make these pieces all work. But it might take a little bit of time. And I think you said it perfectly. I think this schedule is set up well to advantage Creighton, both in the short term, but also a little bit longer term to help them be more prepared for the UConns and in the St. John's of the world when they get into conference play.
Yeah, and the other thing about the Iowa State thing is I think that doesn't read off as a marquee game, but I think Iowa State's going to be a top 10 team in the country.
Yeah.
And so that one I didn't even include because I thought that, Gonzaga is going to be good too. I think Baylor is going to be okay. But if you can go 1-2 in those, that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And you look at some of the other games and you just got to beat Nebraska if you can't win one of the other ones. Yeah. And so recently, I believe Nebraska's had the upper hand against Creighton after years and years of Creighton dominating Nebraska. So that is not a foregone conclusion whatsoever, especially without the institution defensively that was Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Right.
And now like you mentioned, Ashworth gone. But I'm not as worried about the offense because, like you said, McDermott finds a way to cater to his guys. They're going to shoot a lot of threes still. Jackson McAndrew is someone I'm really excited about. But losing Jemiah Neal matters a lot because he was their dynamic break-you-down athlete. And so I'm curious to see what they are. Creighton's one of the teams I enjoy watching most year in, year out. But I think they may have to temper expectations in non-conference. And as Big East play, you hope to catch stride later in the season because this is a team that has as much of a change with as little change of a roster as you can see, just because of how important a couple of their staples were the last couple of years. Like they lost Nemhard and were fine. And that Nemhard's fantastic. Yeah. And they lost Trey Alexander and they were fine. They lost Arthur Kaluma and they were fine. But they lose Ryan Kalkbrenner. And I think their non-conference is well suited to dealing with that departure and getting them some tests against the best athletes and the best teams, but also get them comfortable about playing their style of basketball against inferior opponents.
Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We always appreciate that. Isaac and I will be back with you on Friday with a fun guest lined up. So that'll be a fun way to close out the week. And then, of course, next week, we're both going to be on vacation. We got some shows already pre-ready for you all. So that should be a fun week as well as we continue to talk about some summer league stuff. Look at some of these rosters. We're getting real close to starting our conference and team preview series as well. So check it out as that comes out starting very soon. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the lawyer family, especially today. So we only talked about two of Fletcher's teammates at Purdue. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the McBruins. And until Friday, peace out.